Income inequality. It's the battle cry for Barack Obama. But according to a story this week in the New York Times, changes in marriage patterns rather than changes in individual earnings may account for up to 40% of so-called income inequality. Is there a fiscal fix for a cultural crisis? I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined now by Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. Well, men, by nearly every economic measure, married people do better than those who don't marry, and children raised by married couples do better than those raised in single-parent households. Yet a rapidly growing share of single mothers have never married, have children with multiple men, and seem condemned to the low end of the economic spectrum. Well, Stephen Green, has the New York Times awakened to the brutal economic reality that so-called sexual liberation may lead to poverty and desperation? Or are they just setting us up for the next entitlement wave that will make married people feel guilty for their stable lives and pay single moms an inequality bonus?
Oh, dude.
Yeah, you can probably guess which way that's going to go. But you know what?
Yeah.
I'd like to differentiate between sexual freedom or liberty and a lifetime of debauchery. If I'd have married the first girl I fell in love with and then we tried spending our lives together, we would have been miserable because we were just wronged for each other, and also because she turned out to be gay. That just wasn't going to work for either of us. But
Turned out to be,
in the
or
days
was
when it was an
caused
economic well, I don't want to know. I've been avoiding that one for 25 years.
Okay,
And
fair
I don't want
enough.
to know.
Keep looking away.
But you know what? It used to be an economic necessity for people to get married at 15, 16 and start popping out babies to run the farm. Those days are over, and let's pray they never return. But if you want kids, you owe it to them to do it the old-fashioned way and settle down before you start having kids. And looking at these figures, you know what? You owe it to yourself, too.
You know, by the way, Steve, in the 1950s, 85% of the women who got pregnant while single were married before the baby was born. Just a little factoid for you.
Yeah.
Bill Whittle, you know we
do it.
had a recent Republican presidential candidate who tried to tell us that government's policy with regard to family and lifestyle is not only a moral issue, but a fiscal one as well. Is there any way to talk about this issue without cleaving the GOP in twain?
I'm happy to cleave the GOP in twain. You cannot escape the fact that social conservatism and fiscal conservatism have strong correlational bonds in many areas, And look, when you get right down to brass tacks, what really is the essence of conservatism? The fundamental, I think, for me, the fundamental tenet of conservatism is you can generally assume that stuff has worked well for hundreds or thousands of years, given billions and billions of test sets, is probably the best situation for your particular set of circumstances. The reason that the two-parent man-woman monogamous marriage is a conservative value is because it absolutely works better across every possible metric. It works better financially, works better for the health of the kids, works better for contented role models, works better for everybody. Now, that's not to say you have to live in a world where you should be forced into that paradigm. We believe in freedom, and if you want to live a different life, that's your business. But be prepared to understand that you're not the first person to try this stuff. This has all been tried before, all of it. And what works, works, and what doesn't, doesn't. And this is yet another example of unintended consequences of what looks like liberty, but is liberty, it is, but has consequences that have been tried before and have been rejected because of the cost.
Well, Steve, as we mentioned in a recent Trifecta, and Bill just indicated, correlation is one thing, but correlation is not causation. Do you think the collapse of the family, especially in urban areas, causes poverty? Or do poverty and underfunded public schools, racial profiling by police, and racially disproportionate incarceration of men, do they cause the breakup of urban families?
You know what? I don't think it's either or. I think it's all of the above. It's a vicious circle too. But even a circle as a starting place, you know, where the pen first touched down on the paper, and that place is the absence of fathers. You take the father out of the home because of jail, because of the stupid drug war, or if you never invite that father into the home in the first place from just sleeping around and having babies, that kicks off the chain reaction, that vicious circle. I guess the question is, how do you break it? How do you get fathers back in? And I'm sorry, Scotty, I don't have an answer for that one.
Well, Bill, suppose a Republican candidate came along who could unite the so-called fiscal and social conservatives around a vision of American freedom and prosperity. What would he have to say to do that?
That's a superb question. I was just up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I was with a very religious family of 9 kids, and I have never seen happier children in my life. They were very traditional in terms of their role models, but when they talked to Dad, they didn't just tap him on the shoulder and he'd just glance at him, hang on a second. They would wait behind his shoulder until he had finished talking. When they were sure that he wasn't being interrupted, they leaned into him and said, Papa. And Dad would turn around to them and he'd look them square in the eyes. And if it was his daughters, he'd hold both of their hands. And they knew they were getting his full attention and his full respect. And he was kind to them and he listened to them. And I got the feeling that if he had to be mean or strict, he would be. But I didn't think those opportunities arose very often because those kids knew they were loved. Now, I don't think there's a person in America that could look at a family like that and not say, I want that for myself. I desperately wanted it for myself, desperately. So what we can do, I think, is we can make the case, as always in the case of conservatism, not for coercion, but for persuasion. Not to say that you have to be in a marriage like this or a relationship like this. Be in whatever you want to be. But at least show people the alternative. Show them the case of the financial, the emotional, and the social power of men and women who love each other, who are committed to each other, who raise children in a loving home and value those children, and then simply let individual people make their own free choices based on outcomes. And if you make that case, Scotty, I don't know how you lose. But the reason that this case is not being made, I don't mean to run long, but liberals abhor the big family because the big, powerful, centralized, traditional family is the only bulwark against the state and all of its power. And that's why fathers are portrayed as idiots or bumblers or louts on every single television show and every single commercial. They're 14-year-old children countered by a saintly, all-powerful wife. It's just not like that in the real world, and we all know it. So we have to break through those stereotypes that the left produces in order to destroy the family, and they're destroying the family because they want the power for themselves. I look forward to your vote.
Well, there's a young woman in the city with dreams of better things, a life of accomplishment, joy, connection with friends, a bond with a man that grows deeper with the years and more meaningful with the new life that springs from their shared love. But then a friend says, those are your mother's dreams. Look at her. She's trapped, weighed down with responsibility. You're made to soar to the clouds, to run unhindered to the horizon. And so the young woman casts aside the ancient dreams and goes where she will, does what she wants. Years later, as she bears alone the burden of fleeting encounters with a dozen empty suitors, she wonders why the clouds grow more distant, the horizon retreats. Most of all, she wonders why she listened to her friend rather than to her heart. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at PJTV, I'm Scott Ott.